Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to this, what I think is the best breakout room where we're going to be discussing decarbonisation. So thank you all for coming to join us today. My name's Louise Gittins. I'm Vice Chair of Transport for the North, and I'm leader of Cheshire West and Chester Council. And some of you who might be interested in connections between England and Wales in our little corner of the world up here will know that I also chair a lobbying group called Growth Track 360, which is made up of local government and businesses trying to improve connections between England and Wales. So I'm delighted to chair this session today where we've got some esteemed guests who are going to give their view on decarbonisation and the role that transport can play. And then we'll have a question and answer session. We have got a roaming microphone, which I'm hoping will work. And we've got one of our lovely new Transport for the North microphones here for our guests. So you can't not know who we are today. So on the panel today, I'm really delighted I've been joined by Peter Cole, who's Head of Decarbonisation for Transport for the North, Professor Piers Forster, who is the Interim Chair of UK Climate Change Committee, Lauren Pamma, who is from the Green Finance Institute, and Professor Jillian Anable from the University of Leeds. So, Peter, would you like to open up? There we go.
Hello. Yes, it's working. Fantastic. So, yeah, I'm Peter Cole. I guess I'd really wanted to sort of lead off and put the spin, as I see it, on this workshop, which is really around inclusivity. So we have another breakout session on inclusivity, but for us it's very much intertwined with decarbonisation at TFN. And in that way, as we heard in the opening plenaries, it's very much entwined with stimulating our local economy too. This isn't virtue signalling or anything like that. It genuinely is good for our local economy if we can do decarbonise in the right way. And in that vein, our decarbonisation strategy update that we're planning to start this year, finish next year, is very much focused on that angle of what is an inclusive decarbonisation for the North in terms of transport. And so this really, in a way, is a bit of a kick-off for that. I'm really interested to hear the panel's views and also your views on what we need to consider on that. So I'm going to pass over to Piers.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So I'm here on behalf of the Climate Change Committee, and it's our job to provide the independent evidence to government on its net zero decarbonisation journey, and particularly for transportation, it's not doing very well. If you have a look at our transport emissions, they're the biggest emitting sector of the economy, and they're not coming down. And what we try to say to government is it will not be able to achieve its climate budget targets if it doesn't have an inclusive journey to that net zero transition. And I want to talk about two of the aspects of that inclusivity. The first one is it has to involve the local authorities, and it has to be able to devolve authority to different parts of the country. And it isn't doing that effectively at all. In fact, again, the opposite. We've seen the cultural wars emerging over things like low traffic neighbourhoods and things, and it ought to be up to the local authorities to really say what is best and what works best for their communities. The other thing the government's doing is putting all its eggs into the basket of EVs. it has quite good targets on that, and we are beginning to deliver on that part, but it is ignoring opportunity like active travel opportunities and public transport, of course. And this is a way, as Peter talked about, to really support your communities on that decarbonisation journey. And as Martin Tugwell said this morning, 3.3 million people in the northern area don't have access to that good public transport currently. And with the net zero journey, it's only a kind of one-off opportunity to transform this country, and you have to take your population with you, and you have to do it in the right way. And the other thing I want to push on is the size of the cars and things too. I mean, they're clogging up our roads and our pavements. If you're a disabled person in a wheelchair, you can't get down the pavement. We've got to park cars, and the bigger cars are worse for carbon. So there's the opportunity there that the government isn't exploiting. I think I've talked too long, so I'm now pass.
Thank you. Lauren Pamma, I'm from the Green Finance Institute, and we're all about trying to accelerate particularly private sector capital into parts of the economy that need to decarbonise, so transport being a key area. But obviously what's really key is to be able to do that in an inclusive way and actually making government's money go further for longer. So trying to incentivise private sector to come in actually where it's commercially viable to do so, and then leave the public sector to be able to fill the gaps where perhaps it's not commercially viable and never will be. So, for example, charging infrastructure, that could be in an area that is a lot more rural and is never, the business case is never going to make sense. That is somewhere where perhaps the government funding should step in and be used to basically provide infrastructure or public transport for social good. And then private sector can come in and fill the rest. So we're trying to work on a number of different ways in which that government capital can be deployed. So moving away from grants and perhaps using it as guarantees or as some way of sort of sharing the risk so that more capital can come in. There's a couple of projects in particular that we're involved in at the moment. One's looking at decarbonisation of schools and actually how schools can be used as potentially as a transport hub. They're areas where they tend to all have car parks, they're in residential areas, they're perhaps near people who don't have off-street parking, and actually can you allow local residents to charge overnight, or people who are coming and using those schools at weekends, dropping their kids off at football matches, etc., to use. So that's a really interesting way in which we're looking at how those can form part of the transport network. Actually, they could host car sharing clubs and things like that as well for people who live nearby and don't have an alternative, reliable public transport. And then we've also recently been involved in a project in Orkney looking at how we can get infrastructure onto the island and repay that on a usage basis, so that the residents on Orkney are being encouraged to sort of make that shift over to electric vehicles, be that freight vehicles or buses or cars themselves, and they've only got to repay that infrastructure once it starts being used and is revenue generating.
Thank you. Hi everyone, good morning. I thought I'd start off just with a stock take, which is just to remind ourselves that Transport for the North's decarbonisation plan, published December 21, I think. So the target is for a 56% reduction from 2018 levels by 2030. And here we are, obviously, in 2024. Now, that 56% reduction is an average. So the passenger transport sector is likely to have to go further than the freight sector, given what we know about the time lag involved in changing the technology, the engine technology for freight, okay? So 56% goes up, it's more for the passenger sector. Within that, the same sort of thing. Cars are probably going to need to go further and faster than other parts of the network, given the time lags again. Certain people are going to have to go further and faster than other sectors. So those that are emitting excess emissions, that are responsible for a disproportionately large amount of emissions, are going to have to go further, because some sectors of the society actually need to be able to increase the amount that they travel, and actually are the least affordable ones to afford electric vehicles, so may have to also increase their emissions in the short term. And then there are certain places that are going to need to go further than other places, just by virtue of geography and availability of alternatives, right? So my question is to everyone here, if we're on that trajectory for a 56% reduction, some places right now, somebody needs to tell me where the places are right now in the north that have actually managed to reduce by 25% their emissions since 2018. So that's a 2020 pandemic year level of reduction in traffic, sustained every year. Can anybody tell me anywhere that's happened? So the reality is then that we have speeches like we've had this morning that don't mention the car. The only mention of the car this morning was in relation to some charging infrastructure. We have to talk about the car, not about buses, not about bikes, not about trains. We have to talk about how we are going to reduce car traffic, because that now is the only way we are going to meet these emissions. And investing in alternatives is obviously absolutely key to that, investing in integration. But that in itself is not going to reduce traffic unless alongside that investment is significant reallocation of road space and significant reallocation of resources. We have to take from certain sections of society, certain parts of the network, and we have to give to others. So unless we are prepared to talk about radical changes to how we are going to reduce traffic, and that is going to involve pricing mechanisms, then we have to stop talking about the fact that we have a decarbonisation strategy, because we do not. And every time the radical solutions are mentioned, discourses of denial are rife. We can't do that, it's politically unacceptable. Well, what's politically unacceptable is having targets that we know we have absolutely no chance in meeting. That is part of why the public are so sceptical, that there's this blame game of the public aren't doing the right thing, and yet that out in the world is just a whole load of contradictory signals and no emergency being actually planned in terms of what we're doing. So my plea to you is that if we are not prepared to talk about radical solutions, then please can we talk about what level of emissions we are prepared and able to achieve, and be very honest and say, we can't do this, folks. We're going to take our chances, miss our targets, and it's a free-for-all as who gets affected, and we'll have to ultimately reduce the amount that they travel in the future, because we're going to allow climate change to run amok. And we'll just let that happen to whoever it happens to happen to, and we know that mostly it will be those that are disadvantaged who will be affected the most.
Thank you. And thank you for that passionate speech at the end, which I think we can use now as a platform. And as an elected member, I know one of the biggest things that my residents talk about is the amount of traffic on the roads, the speed, the lack of care. So you have, and my quandary with all of this is how we take the public with us on that journey, because on the one hand we have that, and then we're talking about low traffic neighbourhoods, the outrage that causes. So I'm concerned about 2024. We've got 6 years, and that is really, really scary, but I'm not sure everybody understands that. And I suppose it's what can we do within our remit as we sit within the room as individuals, as local authorities, local organisations, if that direction isn't always coming from the top. So what can we do? What can we do in Transport for the North? And I think that needs to be a big part of our new decarbonisation strategy, because time is marching on. So we need to be doing something. So I think I suppose my first question would be is, how do we win hearts and minds in the whole decarbonisation discussion? And if you had one thing that we could do to start that off, what would it be? So I can see you all thinking very, very closely. So I'm going to start this end and work round.
It's sort of the golden question, the winning the hearts and minds aspect. I guess one thing we've at Transport for the North, we're in a great position in a sense, in that, you know, we're not national government, we are representing our partners, but that does sort of provide tensions within itself. And I see my job as, you know, always looking at trade-offs between, so for instance, there are things and interventions that you can put in place that are best for inclusivity, but don't give you the best and most rapid carbon reductions, and things like that. So I think despite that, though, I think that one thing that we have really tried to major on is to really accentuate those co-benefits of decarbonisation. Net zero, I actively hate the two words net zero. I mean, most people don't know what it means. If you do know what it means, it's not that convincing. And it's become a little bit of a, you know, a hobby horse for deniers and people who you know, are against low traffic neighbourhoods and things like that. But, you know, people do care about their kids. They do care about what might, you know, about the affordability of food. They do care about, you know, whether we're going to see diseases migrating up here. These are issues people can start to relate to. People do care about air quality. If they actually knew perhaps better what that does to them, they do care. They do care about their access to economic opportunities. You know, huge lost opportunity in the North, really, from not having that higher rate of economic productivity from, you know, a lot of people within our communities, from just not having access to things they should at a reasonable, you know, journey time at a reasonable cost. So I think I would say is that we have to get better at leading out with some of these more human, less disparate messages, more tangible messages. And we have to try and cut through the chaff and really focus on the empirical evidence and what it's showing us in respect of those. Again, that needs strong political leadership to be able to push that through.
Thank you. That's really interesting. That strong political leadership's really important, and calling out people as well, I think, who are. I hope we've got no climate change deniers in the room today, but people who are, you know, I've had death threats for threatening, you know, for wanting to put in active travel lanes. So that's, but those people don't get, we sort of give in to that noise, and I think we do need to be braver at a leadership level, but it needs to be that everybody needs to be on board with the messaging. Piers?
Yeah, I would completely agree with that, but I think the big thing is that because central government is so allergic to anything that involves changes in behaviour, I think it has to be done within the community. And I think the big thing is that people want their voices to be heard, that everyone has a legitimate voice, even though people that are against low traffic neighbourhoods. So there are things you can do, like citizens' assemblies. There are things that you can do across the Transport for the North region about looking what works in different towns for better kind of practice. And it's our job as the committee to go and collect the evidence. So what we can do is go and collect evidence to show that the low traffic neighbourhoods really do work for the communities that they can serve. So I think that is really beholden on all of us to provide the evidence to really make sure people have their voices properly heard.
Thank you. Lauren?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there is one silver bullet solution, which is part of the problem. But I think from a central government perspective, that policy certainty is really critical. I think the announcement last year to row back on the 2030 phase-out date of cars and vans was a bit of a sort of a shot in the eye. That just sowed more consumer confusion about what to do and how important the need to do something is. So I think that sort of constant flip-flopping about, well, actually, what should we be doing and how do we do it doesn't help people. So I think some honesty about, well, what do we need to do and how do we get there, and more information to people to help them make the right decision. Because sometimes it isn't, there's a whole load of myths flying around, for example, about sometimes the cost of an EV and the fact that that's more than a diesel and petrol. Actually, for a lot of instances, it isn't at the moment. Information about bus routes and the carbon activity and everything. I think information is just such a critical one, but just with some honesty to people about how you do that and why you do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with all of that. One of the things that I would start with is that what can happen when we start to talk about what I referred to as the more radical solutions is that people say it's unfair. It's unfair. That's going to, disadvantage me or people like to advocate for other sectors of society. Well, at the moment, the transport system is unfair. So that's the first thing. That's really countering that unfairness argument with talking about how we can actually make this, do things in the future to actually even up some of the opportunities. The other thing, similar thing, is that happens is that people compare the changes that may need to be proposed to their current cosy, relatively affordable, actually, lifestyles. Whereas what we're looking at in the future, if we continue, whether it's with not meeting our carbon targets, or we continue with not meeting our air quality targets, or our congestion issues that we're not solving, any of those things, we're looking at a future with even further delays on our network, with even further costs, with actually having to reduce our mobility anyway. So this is about a proactive way of managing reductions in mobility and cleaner mobility rather than having it imposed on us, frankly, because we just have got it all so wrong. And that might sound sort of subtle, but actually we don't do it in these discussions. We don't do it in the way that we kind of sell the policy, sell the vision. We still allow people to compare to their current cosy, affordable lifestyles. So that's absolutely fundamental. And then the other thing is that we do have to start to referring back to the fact that the current system is unfair, we do have to start to not pretend that we have win-win solutions. We have no win-win solutions left. There will be some losers, right? So we have to have a discussion about who the losers are going to be. We have to have an honest discussion. And I just want to refer you to some research that I've recently done in Scotland. So Scotland have a target to reduce car traffic by 20% by 2030. They're nowhere near it and they don't have a plan, but they have a target. Sort of, there's a familiar thing here. But I did some research with people around that target. And, okay, this was about a year ago, so still coming out of COVID when it was fresh. But what people said, they said lots of things. One of the things people said was, well, during COVID, when it was an emergency, we had politicians flanked by scientists on a daily basis, but certainly on a regular basis, telling us what the progress was or wasn't. They may have not been telling the truth, but anyway, they were the point being that there was a system of politicians flanked by scientists, evidence, who was doing it, who was complying, who wasn't, who was winning, who was losing, what the number of deaths were as a result, i.e. what the actual consequences of not getting it right was, very much visible. And that's what we need. We need that kind of communication in order to convince people. So that's all about communication and framing. There's obviously loads more about the actual solutions on the ground, but we do have to get that right, and then we can start to talk about the solutions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so who would like to go next? Who's got a question? We've got this lady at the front here.
No photo, please. Excuse me. Hi. I'm from Manchester. I'm Jeffrey from Manchester. I try to. Sorry, I just forgot what I said. The thing about for me, I have so many ideas myself in order to transform, how we operate our services, customer experience, passenger experience, logistics, rail, and there's so many in my phone and on my computer that I want to give to people like Andy Burnham, Tracy Brabin and Steve Rotherham. And I want to, of course we don't have the, right now as per se, but it's, I feel how we're trying to, keep nagging at central government, because at the end of the day, we're still a Victorian democracy. And whether you like it or not, devolution is well and good, but we're still bound by the DfT, and I think when it comes to, I'm not so bothered about targets right now, because even though I have so many I want to bring to the industry, I can recall so many countless experiences of my unemployment.
So have you got, just to sort of speed up, because quite a lot of hands up,
sorry.
do you want to put a question to the panel, and then I'll take two more, and then we'll answer those. So do you want to get involved more? Because you feel like how do you get your voice heard, maybe?
In my opinion, my voice isn't being heard at all,
Okay.
because I have so many ideas I want to give, but yet I've never worked a day in my life.
Okay. So I think that's really good. How do people get their voice heard? So that can be our first question. And then there's somebody at the back there. And, yeah, okay, Steve here.
Shall I go now?
Yes, please, thanks.
Hi, everybody. Great panel. Thank you. My name's Andrew Dowding from Interchange. Question for Gillian and panel, actually, about road pricing. Why is it so politically toxic? Is it as politically toxic as we all think it is? And is it perhaps an inevitability?
So, rail pricing. Road. Okay, sorry. Okay. And, sorry, Steve, it's gone over there now.
Hi, Steve Fowkes. I'm chair of our transport committee to the city region, and I enjoyed your honesty, to be frankly honest, because it is getting more and more worrying that we are not making the progress needed. But I think it's very much about language. Even amongst those people involved in active travel, there seems to be some confusion about what active travel means to some people. So cyclists are often arguing against walkers who are arguing against any wheeled vehicle. So we can't get that message clear and concise at that very low level, then we are struggling. So it's about language. And an example, I was at a meeting, we're talking about a low traffic neighbourhood, a 15-minute community, all those slogans. This lady actually stood up and said, I don't want one of those because my nan lives in North Wales and I won't be able to go and visit her. And that's the level of misinformation that is out there. So we really need to, to get the message. And politicians need to be braver. And I think at this point in time, no one's going to commit to a whole-scale policy. We need to be ready when a new government comes in, if that's the case, and have them to hit the ground, because a lot of these things are long-term, and the long-term benefits, so politicians become very short-term around election time, so it's all about timing. If you've got a programme ready to run, and it may not be public, but you've got to get it done, because in 5 years, people say, oh, what was all the fuss about? It works.
So is that a question about messaging. How do we get the
question
messaging?
about messaging about, you know, everybody has a right to use every part of the network, including motorists, and it's about that sort of message about it's beneficial to both. I don't want to knock someone off a bike in my car. I don't want to be knocked off my bike by a car, and that message doesn't seem to be getting through.
Yeah, thank you. Right, who wants to start? Maybe the first one about how do we make sure people's voices are heard. Who would like to start with that one? Should
I can on a practical level. I mean, I think there is well, there's two answers. There's on a very practical level, if there is a strategy or target setting, there is normally a public consultation, and you know we do need to get involved with that. I think there is a question about how well we involve young people, because by and large, the transport system that we're talking about in the round today isn't for us. It's for people at university or at school. Or in the case of heavy rail, they probably haven't been born yet. So I do think we need to do that better. And there's a sort of a teach-in element to that. Because I don't think that young people all have the climate conscious that we think they do, actually. But they are young and they haven't set habits necessarily yet. So I think there's a lot of logic in engaging better on that front. The other thing I'd say is that I completely agree with Piers' comments about, you know, a lot of this has to be measures and interventions that are community-led. The best type of, I guess, persuasion to buy an EV or put solar panels on your house or get a heat pump is when your neighbours do it and they do it effectively. And we often see, particularly in the Asian community, you often see that you'll suddenly see a load of solar panels going in along a street because they've got very close-knit communities, and when one does it, they tend they sometimes will take that on mass. So I think community-driven communication and empowerment is really important. I was at a meeting at Leeds University a month or so ago, and I talked about sort of going back to the 90s, and it does feel like we're back in the 90s when we talk about community champions, but I think that's a really, really important aspect of how we go forward, because we've got to make it relevant to people. Just did want to say one thing on that road pricing aspect, Andrew, and that I think we talk about road pricing, automatically we go in on road pricing and we think about cars, but actually it's the whole travel pricing system, because this isn't a war on motorists. This is about looking at things proportionately in terms of the wider costs and benefits caused to society as a whole, and making sure that actually it's a fair price that people are paying for the travel choice that they're making. And I think reframing it like that is going to be a really important part of how we push that forward.
Thank you. Piers, do you want to add?
Yeah, perhaps I'll just comment on Andrew's point there, that I think some road pricing is inevitable. I mean, we talked to HMT about it often, and they get kind of billions of pounds annually for the tax we pay on petrol and diesel, but it's going to take a very brave chancellor to that, but it is inevitable.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think road pricing will happen, and we've been trying to say, you know, talk about it early, because actually people are using it as an excuse not to change their habits now, because they're saying, well, it might look cheaper now, but actually when road pricing comes in, it will be more expensive, so why should I? So I think it comes back to that sort of that honesty and transparency and some long-term policy planning, but you're right, they're all avoiding it because it just doesn't feel like a vote winner, I think, unfortunately. And as for getting your voice involved, I know, was it Steve or Martin said earlier about that northern network of individuals that they have? Northern Voices, there you go. So maybe find your way onto that Northern Voices panel somehow. Okay.
I'll start with the road. Well, I'll concentrate on the road pricing question. So why hasn't it happened? Well, firstly, we need to not call it road pricing. so I entirely call that. That's the wrong word for it. This is about the transport system, how we have fair prices within the system and generate revenue for the transport system. So new words, let's have a competition. Secondly, one of the main things I want to say is that one of the reasons it's gone so badly wrong, it keeps going so badly wrong, is that what this needs to be about is what the revenue will be spent on, not how much people are going to be paying as such, or at least how much people are going to be paying per mile in their car. We don't have enough of a discussion about where the revenue is going to go, and partly that's because of HMT's non-hypothecation kind of general stance. So I think we need that's the way to make it successful. We could do all kinds of things with kind of future with people being able to calculate what it will cost them on different journeys going forward, with forecasts about what the different charges will be on the different forms of transport. Because there are ways and means of doing this so that many, many people overall are going to be paying less, even motorists, if we do this in a smart way. I think what we really need is some really good local success stories. So whether it is in the form of a CAS or workplace parking levies in Nottingham, which has been such a great success, we need those, we really need those, and anywhere else. London, forget talking about London. London is always going to be different. We can't have London levels of revenue expenditure in the north. So stop comparing ourselves to London. That's just a red herring. But other types of success stories about where revenue's been raised from the motorist and ploughed back in to make an overall transport system that's fairer and more affordable is what we need.
Thank you. And that finding new names for things is really good, because low traffic neighbourhoods, I've had those conversations many times. And actually, when you say, wouldn't you like to be able to walk to a shop and the doctors and oh yeah, definitely. But it's that, oh yeah, but I couldn't go and visit X or they'll charge me if I want to go to Delamere Forest.
And it's a planning principle that we've had for decades.
I know.
We've just now call it low traffic neighbourhoods, and it's toxic.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to come up with a new name for that. Okay, so we've got a guy here. Oh, right at the back. Yes, Rose. And this guy over here. And I'll come in next time. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Brandon Jones from First Bus. My first point, completely agree about hand-in-hand tackling congestion with the decarbonisation plan. But my question is about acceleration. So operators like ourselves work in partnership with local authorities, and we've benefited from the Zebra funding, which is accelerating zero-emission buses into communities, which is great. What we do know, looking ahead, is that funding is going to be difficult to source, whatever government is in place in the next 12 months or so. From our perspective, we're operator perspective, we're moving towards supporting capital expenditure and looking perhaps for local authorities and national government to look at capital expenditure. My question is, if there was a transport minister here today looking ahead to funding and acceleration of decarbonisation, what would you say would be the support and decarbonisation incentive that you'd want from national government to support acceleration of decarb?
Thank you. And right at the back. Rose, do you want to put your hand up and wave?
Hi, thanks very much. I think it was the last round of questions that really got me wanting to ask you something. I think there's a massive disconnect, isn't there, between what people want but then being asked to actually be part of that solution. And Anable, I think you've really touched on that brilliantly today. So I'm a Director of Transport and Highways for Louise in Cheshire West, and I can tell you that the strongly worded emails I receive are not to increase speed limits, they're not to increase or decrease air quality, they're not to increase the distance of services from their places. They are all pleading, please can you make it safer, please can you reduce traffic, please can you put more pedestrian crossings in. Please, can you do everything to create this scenario that we all want to be in, which would then be a rapidly decarbonised transport system? But equally, then you go back and say, well, that's fantastic, but low traffic neighbourhood or whatever we want to talk about it. Oh, no, not like that. No, we can't do it like that. So I don't know whether this is a comment or a question, but my absolute sort of applauding sort of what everyone said today is it's this system-led thinking to say, okay, you want that, we can do it by this, and this is the path, this is a journey in between time, we're all going to go on it together, but this is what you'll get at the end of it. And I just don't think there's been a clear articulation about how good things can be, but how also I think there's again a real disconnect between what people think that they have to do to get there. So we're not asking everybody to make a 20-mile journey on a bike. We're saying under 2 kilometres, it might be easy if we made it safer for you. And it's that kind of reasonable request that I think's missed as well. We jump into this referendum style, black and white, yes or no, about low traffic neighbourhoods that have just got this image of no traffic. So I do think it's a branding, I do think it's communication, I do think it's about reasonable requests, but I think it's about taking people on a journey to show them that actually what they really want is what we're all trying to get to. Sorry, it's more just a thanks for everything that's been said.
And then there was, who was it you there? I'll come next there.
Hi, Florian Longstrand from Steer. I think my question is a little bit related to Rose's question, which is about looking forward. What messages do we need now? I just want to look back in time a bit. I think this debate has become quite toxic in the past 3 years, and especially in the past 12 months. Really sorry to hear, for example, that you've had death threats over a road design, which seems totally ludicrous when you think about it. What are the causes of that? Why has this debate got so toxic so quickly?
Okay, so who wants to, should we start that end now if you want to go first, Louise?
Okay, thank you. So I'll start with the last question, toxic. Loads of thoughts on this, not necessarily evidence-based. I'll just caveat as an academic, I feel like I need to say that. I think, to me, in many, many places, it's no wonder to me that there's protest. I mean, the level of toxicity and the whole kind of conspiracy theory angles, that's something different again. That's kind of real in the realms of other sort of quite radical right-wing activities that are going on. But in terms of why LTNs, traffic, more active travel, ULEZ, etc., are toxic. To me, it's no wonder actually, because they're not set. This relates to the other question. They're not set in with a vision of how this fits in to the bigger plan, why it's necessary, who wins and who loses, because some people do lose. So we can have all the evidence we want about LTNs that says they don't increase the traffic on neighbouring roads. But actually, if people's perception is that they're sitting in their car for longer, because we don't measure congestion, we measure traffic, right? It could well be that some people at certain times of the day are actually forced to sit in their cars for longer in congestion as a result of LTNs. Come on, let's be honest. The honesty is what we have to be. So if that is the case, we have to communicate that and say why that's necessary, that's the effect for some people. Otherwise, we're just going to get he said, she said, and no proper debate around this. And also, as I said before, the transport system is unfair. So for years and years and years, it's been getting more and more unfair. So here we are, if you like, sort of, straw that breaks the camel's back. And now these things that we're putting in, and were originally, a lot of them were put in during COVID with no consultation, it's now bubbling over. And I just think we need to really look at this and think, actually, it's no wonder. We've failed. We have failed on so many different levels in the transport system as a whole to deliver and achieve our outcomes. We're not on track on any of them, not a single outcome. As a profession, we have failed. Let's start to be honest about it and not point the finger at these people that are protesting. Let's actually think, yeah, we got it wrong, and figure out how to do it better. So that's the main thing on that, and I'll shut up now.
Yeah, I won't add anything to that because I think Jillian's far more eloquent than me on language. But on bus funding, I think this is where you know, central government needs to look at how it's deploying its capital, and actually are capital grants the best way for government to be handing out funds for zero emission buses? All that's really doing is enabling the bus manufacturers to keep those prices high, because they know that actually a grant's being given for half of that purchase price anyway. There's no incentive for them to drop that. So personally, I'd like to see them start to reduce those grants. That's what we saw happens with cars, and then we immediately saw the manufacturers cut the list prices of those cars when the grants went. So I think that's moving away from grants and actually saying, is there a way in which they can use their capital to crowd in private sector investment who are interested in funding buses and who do want to fund local places? I think that's the way they need to go. I don't think there'll be any more money available. I think the current government at least seem to think that decarbonisation of buses is well on its way, and the solutions are there, the technology's there. I think it's more around that sort of clarity of policy direction and then trying to use pricing mechanisms to get more people on the buses so that the revenues are up.
Yeah, I will talk briefly about what we can do to accelerate. So the passage in the £2 bus fare is a really good example. And if something like that, getting back to your point about if the policies have good continuity, so that gives everyone the trust and the confidence, the pricing and things aren't going to change, then people can make the investments that we all have to do. So that's what I would say, really about that continuity of plan and policy, really to add to it, and that's what kind of Transport for the North can do. And the other thing is we do need that collective vision of where we want to go, and we need some good brave politicians to put their head above the parapet, to try and make bold choices, and to then do that communication that Jillian talked about, to explain why. So the Welsh Government, for example, they chose to put no more funding into road building, and that was incredibly controversial, but it was a good, strong decision to try and do to change things up. So I think we need those sort of decisions, and we have some very high profile mayors in this part of the world. So that's an opportunity for all those people to set good examples.
I'm not going to say too much because I think most of it's already been said. I think on the acceleration point, we have to keep our funding pots non-modal. That we can talk a lot about sort of decarbonising buses, and it's great what York First have done in York, you were telling me about earlier. But actually, the big challenge is just to get people on buses, whatever they run on. And that's not just about buying more buses and putting on more routes. That's about looking at it as a transport system. And local authorities can do that much better if the funding isn't tied to a mode, and they can prioritise across a transport system to look at, whether that's interventions around integration of public transport or interventions about, works that need to happen to highways to reallocate space, dare I say it. And then I'm just struck by Rose's comments there, which is really interesting, and it's always really good to hear from people on the ground who get the emails. I was just going to... is anyone from Bradford here? Well, Bradford didn't make it. Well, that's a shame, because actually we talk about clean air zones and we know the trouble that we've had in Manchester around that. But actually Bradford did put a clean air zone in about 2 years ago, a bit under the radar really, and maybe that was part of the success. But they didn't go all in, a really strong clean air zone. But they got the principle there of a clean air zone. There were some restrictions, there were lots of exclusions that you could apply for. And people are living with it now and seeing the benefits of that, and hopefully there'll be some really good empirical evidence around the health benefits of that soon. But as I say, people are living with it, and it's something to build on. If you need to do more to reach your air quality targets, you can now build on that in a logical way. And I think it will be great when we have more examples of that we can actually point people to. But there is a lesson in there probably around not necessarily going all in the first place. Make it easy for people. You know, give them the option of applying for exclusions. Everyone's allowed a car that's non-compliant, actually. But they have to register it. They have to go through that process. So I think that's, do look at the Bradford example, because it's a really good one.
Thank you. So I think we've got time for 2 more questions. I'm going to come here to the front row and going to go right to the back again. Sorry, I know everyone wants to ask. I'm sure there'll be a bit of time at the end for a quick informal chat.
Yeah, thank you. Incredible panel. I can feel all the cogs whirring already, so thank you so much. So I'm Lizzie. I'm here on behalf of A Fleet for Change. We're a Sheffield-based CIC looking at tackling some of the transport inadequacies within our systems, particularly starting with the buses. We've split that into 3 strands that we're tackling: commute, access and safety. Starting with safety, getting women and vulnerable people home safe at night. Just to clarify, that means everybody. Everybody's vulnerable when they're in the wrong position. So it's just a good wording to tackle some of the things that aren't happening in Sheffield, despite some of the things that have been put in place, like the Sheffield Women and Girls Nighttime Charter, which has done nothing for transport in Sheffield. There's been no money spent through that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the desirability, because you've talked, Peter, you were talking about buses and getting people onto buses and wanting to improve that. And Jillian, you were talking about cars. And I think we really need to talk about status, because cars are a status symbol. They are desirable. They are the places where people feel comfortable. They feel safe. When we talk about safety, you know, you're looking at people with physical and mental disabilities are much less likely to have access to a car. They're much more likely to use public transport. Women are much more likely to use public transport than men. People from marginalised communities are as well. And unfortunately, this means we've got this perception that public transport, as particularly buses, are for people who are poor and who have failed, who are minority ethnic and who are women. So it's this perception that we have, you know, cars are for very male, very success, lots of money, and it's how do we actually change that? How do we actually make public transport desirable? We've done some research through an Innovate UK grant, and we found that the research we were looking at before that was all statistical. There was very, very little qualitative research out there that was actually asking what people wanted in order to use public transport. And we started that. We've had 400 plus, so statistically significant response, and found that people really do. Actually, the cost they were willing to pay was higher than we thought it would be. People wanted sustainability, they wanted reliability, and they really wanted safety. Obviously, we don't have that at the moment on buses. If you're on public transport, you have the on trains, you have the British Transport Police. If you're on trams, you have tram conductors, but buses don't have that. They don't have that level of safety, particularly at night time. We're expecting, you know, drivers to police and drive at the same time. So I guess it's just how do we actually get to that point where we are, you know, making it more desirable than having a car, getting rid of some of that congestion and kind of improving the status of buses within our society so they become something that people want to use.
Thank you. And then I'm going to send you right to the back, and then I'll bring the panel in. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Pete Kilbane, I'm a councillor in York. I'm the exec member for transport over there, and I might be about to throw a little spanner in the works, but we'll see. Very much appreciate the last contribution in terms of inclusivity, because most of the inclusivity I've heard about so far has been about how do we bring people with us, which is about winning hearts and minds, and that's the politician's job. You know, don't talk about low traffic neighbourhoods, talk about livable streets or living streets. Make sure that you are talking about freeing up the roads for those who need to use them. You know, we can do all that. You know, that's our job, but there is a real issue here that I don't think has been addressed, which is that people are excluded. 20% of my residents can't afford a car. They are poor people and they do use the bus. And there's no reason why they should be held up in traffic by people who can afford to use a car and sit in their car, listen to whatever radio station they want and have it heated to whatever level they want, whatever level of comfort that they want. So My concern is really around road pricing. And you, Les, I don't, and it's a question, genuine question for the panel. What my concern with it is that actually what you're doing is freeing up the roads for those who can afford it, freeing up the right to pollute for those who are prepared to pay the fine, whereas actually what we need to do is free up the roads for those who need to use them for all modes of transport. And in answer to the question that was asked at the very beginning, anybody know any examples of where this has been done, then I would imagine most people in the room will be familiar with Ghent. We went over and visited Ghent, and after a couple of years of planning, in the course of one weekend, they changed the transport system in the city that has taken around about a third of the cars off the road, and it cost them €6 million to do. So it was cheap, it was effective, and it's in, and it looks as though it's staying. I mean, the mayor again did have to live under police protection for about 6 months, but he seemed quite equanimous about that when I was talking to him. So, you know, it can be done. I think one of the reasons we stoke so-called culture wars is that people feel it in the pocket if they think they're going to be priced to use roads that they already think they pay for. So sorry, a bit of a ramble, but that's my concern is road pricing, isn't it? Just freeing up the roads for those who can afford it.
Okay, thank you. Right, who wants to kick off on this one? Go on. We'll go around that. We'll go in a line.
Okay. I think it's a really interesting question about how do we make public transport more desirable. I always love reading those reports from Transport Focus, the bus user guys. I know they did it over COVID. They stopped it last year. But actually, in terms of bus users, well over 80% feel that there isn't an issue with their personal security or the cleanliness of buses. But if you ask car drivers the same question, that would be one of their greatest concerns, is cleanliness and personal security. So it is very much a perceived risk in most cases, although I accept that's not always the case. I don't really have an answer to it, actually, and I always say I'm probably not the best person because I think there's a massive marketing thing here, and I'm not a marketeer, I'm a transport professional, so I'm almost the opposite. In terms of the road pricing, I think this is why we need to go away from road pricing, and we talk about the terminology, because it is about the transport system, and it's never going to be just bringing in road pricing. It's got to be one of a raft of measures. Now, we did some work called Clean Mobility Visions, and we have a clean mobility tool, which you can go on online. Two main findings. One is that there's not a lot of evidence associated with policies and interventions that reduce vehicle mileage, okay, because we haven't evaluated them properly. Some of the best evidence does come from Europe, actually. And the other one was, you know, it's really clear that you have to put carrots and sticks together. You can't just do one and the other. It just won't work. So, you know, that's my... I guess my honest answer to that is if we just look at road pricing, just look at ULEZ, and yeah, of course it will fail. You need to bring forward the alternatives and the genuine travel choices before then.
I'll try and be quick. Okay, I'll try and be very quick in my answers. I think we can do a lot more with commuting employees, so we can get companies to encourage their workforce to get on the buses, and then that will completely change the bus culture. And the other thing to do, it's really why we need politicians to take those very bold choices I was talking about before, and we need to kind of pilot the things as well to get on and do things. And this gets back to the celebration point. Too. It is all too easy for a politician to have a consultation and this consultation, but they should actually give things a try. And I think when people try things, they're not as bad as people first can think they will be. That way, sorry.
Yeah, I haven't got much to add to that, but I don't know if you've read Caroline Criado Perez's book around buses and you know, one of the key sort of not just around buses, it's around data, and it's about actually taking the views of women into data, whereas historically most planning decisions, particularly around transport, have been made by men based on travelling to work, travelling home from work, and actually it's entirely different, or you would make different decisions if you looked at it through the lens of a woman travelling, where you're more likely to be doing trip chaining. So you're dropping your kid off at school, then you're going into town, then you're coming home via the shops, and you're coming back again, and you're doing all of that. You know, that's the reason I mainly use my car, because I've got 1,000,001 things in the boot, none of which I could take with me on the bus particularly easily, or I could. And that's the thing, I think, particularly easily I could do it, but it would require a fundamentally different way of thinking about things. And I think actually that excludes a lot of people from doing various activities. It does, you know, there's no way I could get my son to all the football matches he does without a car. And that just means that people who don't have access to a car don't involve their kids in sport, which then leads to obesity and knock-on effects to everything else. So I think we do just need a whole fundamental rethink about lots of stuff.
Thanks. I'll just come back to where I started, really, and I'm going to do that by an example. So, the Netherlands. You'll all hold that up, I'm sure, as the place to cycle, right? Place that's really invested in cycling infrastructure, that's got it right, yeah? So, in the Netherlands, 29% of trips are by bike compared to our couple of percent here. And 8% of mileage is undertaken by bike in the Netherlands compared to 0 point something here, okay? However, the per capita carbon footprint from personal travel of the average Dutch person is slightly higher than ours. Why? Because they haven't restricted the car. Dutch people, it's a wealthy country on average. They like their cars, they like their large cars, just like we do. And their fleet has got larger, and their average CO2 emissions of the cars sold into the Dutch fleet has gone up and is higher than it was 12 years ago. So the way to make other things desirable, yes, is to invest in them and make them nice and shiny. But really, the way to make other forms of transport desirable is to make the car undesirable. It is the only way to do it. And we still haven't talked enough about that. We've talked about the fact that when we do it, it's not fair. Correct. The ULEZ. Somebody with a brand new Chelsea petrol-fueled Chelsea tractor was exempt from the ULEZ. Somebody with an older two-wheel scooter was not. There was no consideration of the different segments in society and who would be hit the hardest and how to exempt those. Instead, it was data-driven. We have a DVLA database. This says that these vehicles fall below the line and these above the line. That was it. That is simply how that policy was determined and the charges were determined. That's not good enough. It's because we don't actually think about who's it. And during COVID, again, just to use that example, we had huge discussion about key workers and who the people were who really needed to be able to get to work and get to work safely. And that's all been dropped. We can do this. We can have those conversations when we treat it as an emergency, but not when we're in our blinkered day-to-day lives and back to normal and just crying, it's not fair, it's not fair.
Thank you. So we are going to draw it to a close now. Can we have a round of applause for our fantastic panel? Thank you. A lot of food for thought there, a lot for us to think about with our new decarbonisation strategy, and I hope that everyone, when they see information from us coming out, if they can feed into that. And if anybody's interested in data around people who are socially excluded from transport, then TfN have got a fantastic page where you can actually go to where you live to see what the figures are around there. So. Thank you very much, and let's hope in 10 years' time, if we're doing this, we have a different conversation. Yes, thank you very much.
Can we just say, first of all, thanks to the panel, but now it is lunchtime, as you said, food for thought, which is out there. As it says here, form an orderly queue. However, there is the podcast recording on diversity and transport, which is a really important subject to many of us. So if you want to take part in that, grab your lunch quickly and take it with you into the main hall. Otherwise, the next session starts at 1:45. Thank you.